The house smelled like cedar and old leather the night I decided to disappear. Not the kind of disappearing that comes with a plane ticket or a new name. The kind that starts with a phone call, spreads through a family like smoke, and ends with you finally seeing every person you love the way they truly are, stripped of politeness, stripped of performance, stripped of everything except what lives at the center of them. I had built that house with my own hands, or at least with the money from my own hands. 31 years in commercial real estate development. I started with a small contracting firm in Ohio when I was 32 years old, driving a pickup truck with a cracked windshield and eating lunch from a gas station most days. By the time I was 50, I had developed 14 commercial properties across the Midwest. By 62, my net worth sat at just over $87 million, most of it tied up in property assets, investment accounts, and a trust I had structured carefully with my attorney over the better part of a decade. My wife Carol passed 8 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 12 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was the kind of woman who made everything seem manageable. The bills, the arguments with contractors, the nights when I came home convinced I had made every wrong decision a man could make. After she was gone, the house grew large in a way I had never noticed when she was in it. I have 3 children. My oldest son is 40 years old. He works as a senior portfolio manager at a private equity firm in Chicago. He makes somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 a year, not counting bonuses. He drives a car that costs more than most people's first homes. He calls me on my birthday and on Christmas, and occasionally on Father's Day, though he has missed that one twice in the last 3 years. He has a wife who is polite in the careful way that people are polite when they do not particularly like you but understand that tolerance is required. They have 1 son, my grandson, who I have seen 4 times in the past 2 years. My middle child, my daughter, is 37. She is a partner at a litigation firm in Boston. She is sharp, precise, and deeply focused on the accumulation of things, not objects, exactly, but status, security, position. I am proud of what she has built professionally. I say that honestly. What she has accomplished in law required real sacrifice and real intelligence. She calls more often than my oldest son does, but the calls always turn, at some point, in a direction I have learned to recognize. A mention of a property she has been watching, a question about the status of the trust, a careful, lawyerly way of circling something she wants, without asking for it directly. She has 2 children I adore. My youngest son is 34. He teaches 4th grade at a public elementary school in a small town about 40 minutes outside of Columbus. He has taught there for 9 years. He coaches the after-school soccer program and runs the school's food drive every November. His wife works as a medical assistant at a pediatric clinic. They rent a 2-bedroom house. They drive older cars. They are not struggling, but they are not comfortable, and the difference between those 2 things is thinner than either of them lets on. He calls me every Sunday evening without fail, and the calls last somewhere between 40 minutes and an hour and a half, and we talk about nothing important, which is to say we talk about everything that matters. The idea did not come to me all at once. It started with a conversation I had with my attorney, a man named Gerald, who has handled my affairs for over 2 decades. We were reviewing the trust documents, making routine adjustments, when he said something that stayed with me. He said, "Walter, the problem with passing on wealth is that you never really know how it changes a person until after it's done. By then, you can't take it back." I thought about that for a long time. I had already seen the early signs. A phone call from my oldest son the previous spring, needing $250,000 to cover a liquidity problem at the firm, his own money poorly managed, leveraged in a direction that had gone wrong. I transferred it. A conversation with my daughter about a piece of property in the Cape Cod area she had been watching, asking if I would consider gifting it to her now rather than through the estate. I had already given both of them substantial gifts over the years. My oldest son's down payment on his first home, my daughter's law school loans, paid in full, help with cars, with investment seed money, with things I no longer bothered tracking because the number had grown too large to look at comfortably. And my youngest son. I had offered him money more times than I could count. He refused every time, not with pride or stubbornness, but with a quiet, genuine conviction that I found both admirable and, if I'm honest, slightly maddening. He would say, "Dad, I'm okay. We're okay." And then, he would change the subject to something his students had done that week. I talked to Gerald about what I was considering. He looked at me across his desk for a long moment, set down his pen, and said, "That is either the smartest thing you've ever told me or the most reckless. I haven't decided which." I told him I needed 3 weeks to set it up properly. What I planned was this. I would announce, through a series of carefully orchestrated communications, that my largest development project, a mixed-use commercial complex I had been building outside of Cincinnati for 4 years, had collapsed. Environmental remediation costs had exploded. The primary lender had called the loan. The assets were being liquidated in a sequence that would effectively wipe out most of my liquid holdings. The house would need to be sold. My retirement accounts would take years to recover. I would, to all appearances, be starting over at 64 with very little. Gerald handled the paperwork. A colleague of his who specialized in estate litigation was briefed. My actual assets were quietly reorganized into structures that were invisible to anyone who wasn't explicitly shown them. The story we constructed was clean, detailed, and entirely believable. I had experienced enough real financial turbulence over 3 decades to know exactly how it sounded and exactly what documents to reference. Then I made the calls. I called my oldest son on a Tuesday evening. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. I told him the Cincinnati project had failed, that I was working with attorneys to understand the full scope of the damage, and that it was possible I would need some help in the short term while things were sorted out. Nothing specific, just an opening. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call had not dropped. Then he said, "Dad, that's really bad timing. I'm in the middle of a fund restructuring right now. And honestly, my own situation is a little tight after last year." I said I understood. I said I wasn't asking for anything specific yet. I just wanted him to know. He said he was sorry. He said to keep him posted. He said he would try to come out to visit when things settled down on his end. That was the entire conversation. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after we hung up. I told myself I had expected it. I had expected exactly that. But expecting something and experiencing it are 2 entirely different weights. And I felt the difference that night in a way I had not anticipated. I called my daughter 2 days later. She asked questions. That was different from her brother. She engaged with the details. Asked about the litigation timeline. Asked whether I had spoken to my accountant about the tax implications of the asset liquidation. She was in attorney mode immediately. And for a moment, I allowed myself to think that maybe she was going to be different. Then she asked about the trust. She asked whether the trust assets were protected from the creditors in the Cincinnati situation. She asked it in a careful, measured way. The kind of way that revealed she had been thinking about it since before I had finished telling her what happened. I told her the trust was a separate matter and that my attorney was handling it. She pressed gently. She asked whether the property in Michigan, a lake house that had been in the family for 20 years, was part of the liquidation. I said it might be. She went quiet in a different way than her brother had. Then she said, "Dad, I know this is hard, but you should really talk to your attorney about protecting whatever is left. The Michigan property especially. It has significant sentimental value to all of us." She paused. "And market value." I told her I would. She said to call her if I needed anything. She said she loved me, and I believe she meant that last part genuinely, which is the complicated truth of the whole thing. You can love someone and still reach for the inheritance before they finish explaining their crisis. Both things can be real. I did not call my youngest son. He called me. He called on Sunday, as he always does, and I answered and started to say something ordinary, something about the weather or the news. But he interrupted me. He said, "Dad, are you okay? You sound off." I had not prepared for that. I had prepared for a lot of things, but not for being heard before I said anything. I told him there was something I needed to talk to him about, and then I told him the same story I had told the others. He did not ask about the trust. He did not ask about the property. He asked where I was sleeping. He asked whether I had eaten. He asked if I had talked to a doctor, because stress at my age, at this level, was not something to manage alone. Then he said, "I want you to come here." I said I didn't want to impose. His house was small. He and his wife had their own situation. He said, "Dad, stop. Come here." I drove to his house that Friday. It was raining when I pulled up. The porch light was on even though it was 4 in the afternoon, gray enough outside that it felt like evening. He came out to the car before I had finished parking. His wife came out right behind him with an umbrella, even though she was the one without a coat. They had made up the second bedroom for me. His wife had put fresh sheets on the bed and cleared out the closet. She had put a small lamp on the nightstand and a glass of water and 2 of those individually wrapped crackers that I had mentioned once, years ago, that I liked to have before bed because they settled my stomach. I do not know how she remembered that. I sat on the edge of that bed that night and looked at those 2 crackers in their cellophane wrapper, and I came very close to calling the whole thing off. I did not call it off. The weeks that followed were the most clarifying of my life, and also among the most painful. My oldest son called twice. Both calls were brief. He mentioned, in the second call, that he had been talking to a financial advisor about the family situation, and that he thought the best path forward might be to consolidate whatever remained of my assets under a single management structure that he could oversee. He said it would be more efficient. He said it carefully, in the language of financial management. But underneath the language was something I recognized and did not like. He was preparing. He was positioning. He was calculating what might still be recovered from the wreckage of my finances, and he was making sure he was standing in the right place when the dust cleared. My daughter called 4 times. Each call circled closer to a question she never quite asked directly, which was whether I had updated my estate documents since the crisis began, and if so, what they said. She mentioned, once, that she had a colleague who specialized in elder financial planning, and that she would be happy to arrange an introduction. I thanked her. I did not take her up on it. She also, in the third call, mentioned that she had heard from a family friend that the Michigan Lake House was going to auction, and that she wanted to make sure I knew she would be willing to purchase it to keep it in the family. At fair market value, she said. She said it as if that were a kindness. At my youngest son's house, I helped him grade papers one evening. He had 32 students, and he read me several of their essays about what they wanted to be when they grew up. And he talked about each child by name, explained their home situations, mentioned which ones were going through hard things. He noted which one had just started coming out of his shell after a difficult year. He knew every single one of them, the way you only know people when you have chosen to pay attention. His wife worked long days. She came home tired in the way that people who are on their feet for 8 hours come home tired. A specific physical exhaustion that sits differently than desk fatigue. She still made dinner. She still asked about my day. She laughed easily and genuinely, and she treated me not like a burden to be managed, but like a person who happened to be staying in their home, which sounds like a small thing and is not a small thing at all. I noticed the numbers. I could not help it. Their grocery bill was different when I was there. The heat was turned up a degree or 2 higher than they would normally keep it because I run cold. Small adjustments, small costs, none of which they mentioned, all of which I saw. One evening I overheard them in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. Not an argument, they were talking quietly about a car payment that was due and whether to move some money from savings to cover it without stress. My youngest son said, "We're fine. It's not a big deal." His wife said, "I know. I just want to make sure we stay ahead of it." And then she said, "How long do you think he needs to be here?" And my youngest son said, without any hesitation, without any shadow of resentment, "As long as he needs." I lay in that bed with the small lamp on and the window cracked and the rain coming down outside, and I made a decision. I called Gerald in the morning and told him it was time. He arrived on a Saturday. He drove himself, which he rarely does, which told me he understood the weight of what he was doing. He called from the driveway and I told him to come in, and he sat down at the small kitchen table with a leather briefcase that I recognized from 20 years of meetings, and he set it on the table between us. My youngest son and his wife were both home. They sat across from Gerald and from me with the quiet, cautious expressions of people who are prepared for bad news and are trying to hold themselves steady for it. I had asked my oldest son and my daughter to be there as well. I had told them only that my attorney was coming with important information about my financial situation and that it concerned all three of my children equally. My oldest son drove from Chicago. He arrived in a suit, which struck me as a choice. My daughter flew from Boston. She had a legal pad. They sat at the table, all three of my children, Gerald, and me, in a house where the heat was 1 degree warmer than the thermostat would normally be set. Gerald opened the briefcase. He placed a document on the table. He placed a second document. He placed a third. Then he folded his hands and looked at each of them in turn and said, "Before I explain these documents, your father has something he would like to say." I looked at my oldest son first, then my daughter, then my youngest son, who was looking at me with the same expression he had worn when he came out to the car in the rain 3 weeks ago, not guarded, not calculating, just present. I told them the truth. I told them about the plan, about Gerald's help constructing it, about the Cincinnati project being entirely intact, about the trust being untouched, about every asset I had described as lost being, in fact, not lost at all. I told them that the total picture, once everything was accounted for, was approximately $89 million, grown slightly since Gerald and I had begun organizing it. The kitchen was very quiet. My oldest son's jaw moved without producing sound. My daughter set her pen down on the legal pad she had brought. Not slowly. It made a small, sharp sound on the table. My youngest son looked at me and then looked away, and I could see him processing something. And after a moment he looked back at me and said, quietly, "Dad, you scared me." I told him I knew. I told him I was sorry for that specifically. My oldest son found his voice. He said it was manipulative. He said it was deceptive. He said, with an edge that surprised me with its sharpness, that he had been concerned this entire time. I let him finish. I did not argue with him. My daughter said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "What does this mean for the estate documents?" Gerald answered that question. He walked them through the revised trust documents, which he had prepared over the preceding 2 weeks, according to my instructions. The original plan had been equal thirds. I had structured it that way when Carol was alive, and I had not changed it in the years since. The new documents were different. My youngest son and his wife would receive $52 million, the family lake house in Michigan, and the management interest in 2 of my most stable commercial properties, which would generate ongoing income for decades. My oldest son would receive $12 million, with a condition, a portion to be held in a charitable foundation that he would be required to administer for a minimum of 5 years, which meant he would have to sit across a table from people who needed help and figure out how to give it. My daughter would receive $12 million under the same condition regarding the foundation. The remaining assets would go to a series of educational foundations I had been involved with for years, including a scholarship fund at the elementary school where my youngest son taught. My oldest son said the distribution was punitive. I told him it was honest. My daughter asked whether there was room to discuss the allocation. She asked it in the careful, measured tone I knew well. I told her there was not. She was quiet for another long moment. Then she said something I had not expected. She said, "I know I called about the property. I know how that sounded." She stopped, started again. I don't actually know when I started thinking about money first. I didn't used to. I don't know when it changed. She was not crying, but something in her face had loosened in a way I had not seen in a long time. She said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I believed her. I believe that people can hold both things at once, the instinct toward self-protection and the genuine love underneath it, and that sometimes the circumstances of a life push one of those things forward until it crowds out the other, and that it is possible, if the right pressure is applied at the right time, for a person to see what has happened and want to correct it. I told her I loved her. I told both of them that. The foundation requirement stood. Gerald had made sure it was structured without loopholes. After Gerald left, my youngest son and I sat on the back porch while his wife made coffee. It was cold, but neither of us moved inside. The yard backed up to a thin line of trees, and there were birds moving in the branches. Small ones. The kind you hear more than you see. He said, "You didn't have to give us all of that." I told him I knew. He said, "The house would have been enough. Just a little more stability. You didn't have to do all of it." I told him that was precisely why it was his. He didn't say anything to that. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and looked at the trees, and we stayed out there until it was too cold to stay anymore. There is something I have been trying to put into words since that Saturday, something I am not sure I have the right language for. I spent 31 years building things, structures, deals, portfolios, a certain kind of security that I believed, genuinely believed, was the most important thing I could pass on to the people I loved. I measured my success as a father partly in the opportunities I was able to create, the educations funded, the down payments made, the safety nets laid down in advance so that my children would never have to experience the particular fear that had driven me out of bed at 5 in the morning every day for 3 decades. What I did not understand, or did not understand completely, is that removing every obstacle from a person's path is not the same as building their character. And what I discovered, in a small 2-bedroom house in a town 40 minutes outside of Columbus, with the heat 1 degree higher than it needed to be, and 2 crackers on a nightstand, is that character is not built from abundance. It is built from what a person chooses to do when the abundance runs out. My youngest son chose to set another place at his table without hesitation, without calculation, without a single question about what it would cost him. His wife did the same, not because they didn't feel the cost, but because, for them, some things were simply not optional. I think about what my attorney said that night in his office before any of this started. The problem with passing on wealth is that you never really know how it changes a person until after it's done. I would add something to that now. The problem with wealth, in general, is that it creates distance between who you are and what you would do if the wealth were gone. Most people never find out which version of themselves is the real one. My oldest son and my daughter found out. I hope it stays with them. I believe the work of running the foundation will do something to them, not punish them, which was never the point, but reorient them in a direction I think they lost somewhere along the way. My daughter's honesty in that kitchen, the thing she said about not knowing when the money became, the first thought, I have turned that over many times. It takes courage to say something like that. It gives me reason to hope. My youngest son did not find out anything about himself that he didn't already know. He has always been exactly who he is, the steadiest person I have ever loved, standing in the rain with no coat while his wife held the umbrella. The lake house in Michigan has 7 bedrooms. We are spending Thanksgiving there this year. All 3 of my children, their families, my grandchildren. My youngest son has already started a group chat about what to cook. I will sit at the head of the table Carol used to set every November, in the house we bought the year our youngest son was born. And I will look at the people around me, all of them, even the ones who disappointed me, because disappointment and love are not mutually exclusive, and never have been, and I will think about the silence of an empty house, and what I chose to do inside of it. I do not regret what I did. I regret that it was necessary. What I hope, for anyone listening, is this. May you never have to test the people you love to know the answer. May the people around your table on the hard nights be there because they chose to be. And may you know it without needing proof. And if you have the chance, if there is still time, go sit on your youngest son's porch in the cold and look at the birds in the trees and let him tell you it would have been enough. Let him think he's right. Then make sure the trust documents say otherwise.